Good morning. Good to be with you this morning. And I'm actually doing the recording today from my office. Now, my office is not quite set up yet. I moved here a few weeks back, but life has been kind of busy. And anyways, because of that, the office has not yet been set up. And you can see I've got some lights over on the inside, and they're showing up in my glasses. Let me just see if I can switch myself around here a little bit and make that a little bit less of an issue. A little bit less of an issue. Okay, let's see here. One more time. There, that's better. Okay. Well, continuing our series on the 4 pillars of a healthy Christian business leader. The pillars are healthy relationships, biblical financial values, biblical spirituality, and balanced living. And this week, I'm focusing on pillar number 3, which is biblical spirituality. And the topic for this week is seeing God in the everyday. Seeing Him in the everyday. So, as I was thinking about that topic of seeing God in the everyday, we're going to cover some very basic things in which we have the opportunity of seeing God if we have our eyes open and if we're looking. And the example for that really is found in the parables. Parables are all about seeing God in the everyday. And so that's kind of where I want to start today. Just talk about parables, and then kind of throughout the week, we're going to look at different things. I'm going to be in different locations and talk about how those things teach us about God. So Jesus often talked about the everyday things and using them to talk about God and the kingdom of God or life itself. And so, for instance, Jesus talked about farming. A number of his parables. You've got the parable of the sower, where he talks about, someone going out and spreading seed, and some falls on rocky soil, and some falls on the pathway, and some falls amongst the weeds, and some falls, of course, in the good soil. There's the parable of again, another one related to farming, where a farmer went out and he sowed his fields, and then the next day, when it finally comes up, he realizes that somebody else had come behind him and had put a weed seeds in there, and so of course that's when they wanted to go and harvest. Should we just go and tear it all apart? And he said, no, let them grow up together. And it was an example of the church and how within the church you've got people who know God, who love God and serve God, and then you've got people who don't. And they look like they're Christians, but in reality they don't know the Lord. And so he uses the farming analogy, a fair bit. He talks about building a tower. Everybody in that culture would have understood what he was talking about. And before you build a tower, you go and you count the costs and you make sure you have everything you need. You don't just start building and then realize partway through that all of a sudden, I don't have enough, because then you look like a fool. And so you want to make sure that you've calculated and figured that all out. Another parable, thing that he uses is buying a piece of land. And again, that would have been common practice for someone to go and buy a piece of land. And so this, person buys a piece of land, and then of course they find a treasure on that land. And actually they find a treasure on the land, and then they go and buy the land because they realize that there is this treasure. And let's face it, when we're going around buying a house, and right now certainly in Ontario, but pretty much anywhere in Canada, buying a house is a pretty expensive endeavor. But if you look at it, you say, you know what, this is the place for me, and I really want this. Well, then sometimes people will go well and beyond what normally it might be worth because they want it. And so Jesus uses that analogy, that illustration of something very common, going and buying a piece of land, to once again teach about the kingdom of God. And in that case, he's really teaching about salvation and how valuable it is and how serious we ought to take it. The same thing with the tower. He's talking about salvation and how serious we need to take it and counting the cost. And then Jesus talks about problems with your kids. I find that again interesting. Like here he uses just a simple everyday reality. Some families more than others, and of course you got one which we refer to as the prodigal son, which is an amazing parable in of itself, and people have done all kinds of things with it, and we can talk about that parable some other day. But the thing is that in that parable, of course, we've got a son who basically says, "Dad, drop dead. Give me everything that I'm going to get when you die, because as far as I'm concerned, you're dead to me." And he goes off on a journey all on his own, and of course squanders the money. But then when he returns home, how does the dad respond? Now, the parable is very interesting, but Jesus just uses what is a common life experience. You know, people go through that, where kids rebel and they turn and they walk away, and they're angry with their father, they're angry with their mother, they want nothing to do with them, and they just simply go and they say, you know what, that's it, I'm done with this family. But eventually they come to their senses, and then they return home, and that's a real reality that people experience, and they experienced that in that day, and people are still experiencing that today. Of course, there's the other parable where he talks about the two sons. The one son who says, you know, the dad says, go and, you know, work in my field, and the son says, no, I'm too busy, I can't do that, I have no time. But then he goes and works in the field. And the other son who says, oh yeah, absolutely, I'm ready, I'll go, yeah, Dad, I'll be right there, but he never goes, right? And do we have kids like that? You know, like, yeah, we've got kids who you ask them to do something, or you tell them to do something, and one will do it and the other one will not. The one will pretend that they're going to do it, but they never do. The other one has all the reasons why not to do it, but then in the end they still do it. Jesus is using common experiences to teach a spiritual lesson about God and life. And then, of course, parties. Jesus talks about parties. You know, he talks about parties several times, and of course he refers, really ultimately he's talking about the end, when we stand before God and we come into the kingdom of God, and he talks about that as the wedding feast. You know, and a number of times he talks about parties. He talks about going out and inviting people, and then when the invited guests, for whatever reason, don't want to come, then he says, you know what, go and find anybody, bring anybody to the party. We want to have a party, bring them in. And so, again, people would have understood these common experiences, and Jesus uses them to teach spiritual lessons about God and the kingdom of God, and about us and our walk with God. And so this week, that's kind of where the focus is going to be. The point I want to make is that everything can teach us about God if we have the right perspective. Everything. And you might be surprised by some of the things that I'm going to be talking about this week. I'm not going to give it away right now, but I'm going to be talking about some very basic things that teach us and can teach us about God and our Christian life. So today, as you go about your day, consider your job, your business, and what it can teach you about God, what it can teach you about spiritual things. May we live every day looking to see God in the ordinary. Every day, things around us can teach us about Him. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow from a very different location.